The infamous Death's Head units of the SS ran the Nazi concentration camps. These 40,000 guards were responsible for slaughtering millions. They were trained to commit acts of barbaric cruelty in Hitler's name.
They were perfectly normal people, who were in no way different from other people.
The SS specialized in turning ordinary men into monsters.
It wasn't Hitler, Goering, Goebbels, Himmler, or whatever the others were called who abducted me and beat me. No. It was the ordinary shoemaker, the neighbor, the milkman, the postman. They received a uniform, an armband and a cap with a death's head on it, and then they belonged to the master race.
Without the Death's Head uniform, there was little to distinguish these practitioners of Nazi violence from anyone else.
I
pulled off Schwarzhuber's boots and took off his jacket to clean them, and he stood there in his vest. He looked like a nobody. They were nobody when they weren't in their uniform. They were nothing. But when I put his jacket back on, and he put his boots and cap on, then he, like all of them, turned into a monster. They were madmen. All at once, it was as if they ruled the world.
In March 1942, in Darmstadt, not far from Frankfurt, the students at the Justus Liebig Grammar School faced their final exams. Among them was a local lad who'd had a poor academic record as a schoolboy, but now he was unusually well prepared for his exams. His chosen essay topic was Adolf Hitler's liberation of Germany from the chains of the Versailles Treaty. The student's name was Hans Stark. He wore the uniform of the SS Death's Head unit, sewn for him by concentration camp prisoners.
Concentration camp? I asked. What is that then? And my brother said, "You're a Latin scholar, you know. It's where the people are concentrated in a camp and a fence is built around them. That is a concentration camp."
Hans Stark's uniform was made at Auschwitz. This was his workplace throughout 1941. At just 17, he was in charge of Block 7, which housed Polish prisoners. And this is where he revised for his college exams, tutored by some of the death camp's most cultured inmates.
Above all, we had to help him with German literature, with Goethe or Schiller. But when we gave him the answers, he didn't actually want to believe that, as Poles, we could possibly know anything about Goethe or Schiller.
The son of a low-ranking policeman, young Hans was always keen to improve his lot.
Ambition was a characteristic he inherited from our father. He was always aiming higher.
When Hans left school at 16, he was still too young to join the German army, but not too young for the SS. With his father's encouragement, he joined the Death's Head Guards.
My father was happy that he could present his son to his acquaintances and relatives as a member of the SS, as a member of the Führer's elite, and he probably received a lot of admiration for it as well.
From 1934, the SS Death's Head units were fully responsible for the concentration camps where opponents of Nazi rule were held. Soon, Hans Stark was on duty as a sentry at Oranienburg. In December 1940, he started work at Auschwitz.
My brother went to Auschwitz, and Commander Huss met him and asked him what his profession was. And he said, pupil, or something like that. High school pupil. And then he said, that's great. Then you can take over admissions. And so my brother was head of admissions at 17.
In the camps, the SS promoted those who could kill without hesitation, even if they were young enough to be at school.
The SS leaders at Auschwitz were all relatively young people who moved up the ladder very quickly because their superiors thought they were good. They could make a successful career for themselves and quickly climb the ladder. You mustn't forget, at the time, they spoke of the 1,000-year Reich. 1,000 years is a long time, and it's nice up there.
Naturally, I was proud of my brother's position. Once I went to the cinema with him, and the next day my classmates wanted to know who they'd seen me with in the cinema. When I said it was my brother, they were very impressed.
But it seems Hans never spoke to his family or friends about what went on at Auschwitz. Once he'd passed his final exams in 1942, he returned there without a word about the mass murder or his role in it.
He beat the prisoners an awful lot. We often saw him with the punishment battalion there in Block 11, where the prisoners were shot. He was more brutal than the other SS officers. I got the impression that because he was so young, he wanted to prove he was a fully fledged SS man.
They promoted the youngsters who would beat up Jews without making a fuss. They gave them special leave when they did what was expected of them. That was the evil system.
Stark may have believed that needless acts of cruelty would speed up his promotion.
When he came back from murdering, he was very quiet. He washed his hands, sat down at his desk, and smoked, even though he wasn't a smoker. He took in deep drags and breathed in and out. He didn't say a word. And then he would go out and not come back for hours.
Later, I asked him over and over again whether he ever did more than he had to. And he would always answer, "Believe me, I only ever did what was ordered of me."
All SS men were trained to follow orders without question. The proud wearers of this uniform were no exception. It was an honor to serve under the symbol of the Death's Head.
Nach einem Tag angestrengten Dienstes schläft es sich besonders gut. Aber schnell ist die Nacht zu Ende. Schon heißt es aufstehen.
Nazi propaganda portrayed the Death's Head men as a prestigious new elite who never spared themselves in the service of the Third Reich. Many Germans were deeply impressed.
My sister was really enthusiastic. She had seen SS officers and thought they were all really attractive. Strong and hard-working young men. She loved their uniforms. "You have to go," she said to me, and I enlisted out of sheer stupidity.
A baker's son, Harry Seidel joined the SS in 1938 after spending 3 years in the Hitler Youth. He soon found himself serving as a guard at Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
When we were told to mount guard, we mounted guard. Or to get on the towers, we stood on the towers. We did whatever they told us. We enjoyed it. I'm not complaining. I was happy. I was glad to be an SS soldier.
Life as camp guards turned young men like Seidel into ideal candidates to carry out mass murder later in the war. In the camps, they learned how to terrorize and kill so-called enemies of the state.
We were in a permanent state of fear. It was normal to be afraid. As a prisoner in the camp, you had to be prepared to die at any moment.
Looking back, Seidel claims his job as a concentration camp guard was uneventful, even tedious.
You could answer riddles or tell each other stories. You could look out and watch what was happening below. It was a boring job. It wasn't ideal.
The Death's Head units had their own hierarchy, designed to create competition as well as obedience.
Everyone wanted to outdo the others. Everyone wanted to show the others that he was a man and that he was tough.
In this environment, concentration camps were soon to become extermination camps. In July 1934, Hitler placed the SS Totenkopf, or Death's Head units, under the command of Theodor Eicke, the merciless commandant of Dachau concentration camp.
He was always cold, and I'd even call him brutal.
Eicke made Dachau a prototype concentration camp. Often poorly educated, his units terrorized their prisoners, so-called enemies of the state and inferior racial groups. Many were tortured and murdered.
What moves us to the depths of our soul is the helplessness, the complete powerlessness, the feeling of being at the mercy of everyone, without even the primitive right to be treated as a human being.
Above the law, Eicke's men could kill with impunity, and did so.
Those who have murdered once realize what it's like. They know what it's like when someone dies, the agony he suffers. Then they get used to this agony.
In concentration camps like Dachau and Buchenwald, Eicke's men learned the Nazi arts of torture and murder. Eicke once said that to serve in the Death's Head units was the highest honor. His instruction manual to Dachau staff ordered his men to be hard on themselves and hard on their enemies. The camps must run like clockwork. Disorder is wrong. Order is right, Eicke instructed. When prisoners disembarked from trucks, lack of supervision is wrong. Supervision is right. His men duly obeyed.
It was drummed into them, you see. They are all traitors. They are enemies of Germany. They must be liquidated. And so we must be tough with them.
By the end of the summer of 1939, tensions were high throughout Europe. Set on a course of conquest to the east, the Nazis fabricated a pretext for invading Poland, accusing the Poles of territorial aggression. On the 1st of September, Hitler's forces attacked. The German army stormed through Poland with astonishing speed. They were soon followed by a new kind of shock troop, the death squads of the SS Einsatzgruppen. They included many who'd served in the Death's Head units in the concentration camps. Already brutalized, these men were now let loose in Poland. In massacre after massacre, they eliminated much of the Polish ruling class and intelligentsia. Later, the Death's Head men took part in the systematic shooting of hundreds of thousands of Polish Jews. The scale of the atrocities they perpetrated in the East dwarfed their earlier crimes in the camps. A clerk recording a massacre noted, "Morale was good." Their training by Theodor Eicke was bearing fruit. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Death's Head soldiers again served in the Einsatzgruppen. They spearheaded the war within the war, Hitler's campaign to annihilate Soviet Jews and communists alike. From 1941 to 1943, Harry Seidel served in Einsatzgruppe C.
We had no idea what it would be like, only that we were to join a unit and take over the guard and security duties. It gradually dawned on us what was going on.
Working behind the lines, the Einsatzgruppen's mission was to kill partisans and Jews, especially the Jews. The Pripyat marshes near the Russian city of Pinsk was the scene of one of countless massacres. In July 1941, the German army advanced into the region. The SS followed close behind, on horseback.
The Germans came on white horses. I remember it well. They rode directly past our village, further towards Ivanichi. They obviously knew their way around because they rode straight there. And then we heard a commotion and screams.
Claiming to be hunting down partisans, the riders marauding through the surrounding villages killed at will.
When I looked out of the window, I saw what was happening. The SS men stood at the front. Behind was a vehicle on which the mothers had been tied up, and their sons followed behind them, also shackled. They were flanked by the German horsemen. I saw the horses had the blood of the victims on their hooves.
Throughout the region, Jews were driven out to the edge of their villages and shot. Some were even forced to dig their own graves.
They kept on digging until the earth was almost up to their waists. And the Germans cried out, "That's enough." Then they shouted out, "Dance, Jew, dance." And a mouth organ was played. My father said to me, "That, Nina, is the SS."
In SS newsreels, it was all so different.
Auch die Pferde sollen es gut haben.
No mention was made of the mass killings.
Ein leicht Verwundeter. Dieser ist erkältet.
The SS were portrayed as noble warriors who were kind to animals. The head of the SS cavalry units was Captain Hermann Fegelein, a well-known playboy.
He was a brilliant showman. He had an eye to his own advantage, and he was vain. In fact, this was the key to his success.
He was well in with the Nazi leadership and knew how to stay in their favor. He married Gretel Braun, the sister of Hitler's mistress, Eva. A Nazi careerist, Fegelein refused to let mass murder spoil his enjoyment of life.
There was no mention of murder and manslaughter. I don't know. He just chatted away like a true Bavarian, and we all actually thought he was really nice.
Fegelein rose to become Himmler's adjutant.
There were human beings and then there were brutes. The kinds of terrible things that a man like Fegelein would stoop to. They were, in the context of the time, perfectly legal.
In the Ukraine, the SS incited local people to terrorize their Jewish fellow citizens. Years of stored-up anti-Semitism were suddenly given free rein. But they often did the killing themselves. In 1941, Einsatzgruppe C murdered thousands of Jews at Shitomir. Harry Seidel was present, but claims he killed no one.
In the morning, you get the order to line up, and then off you go. You're told what is to happen, that there are this many people to be hanged because they've committed such and such a crime. And for us, the matter was settled. It was done.
Murder was now routine for Einsatzgruppe C. One SS man wrote home,
"My dear sister Kathy, we have another mission. We have to shoot dead all the Jews in a 150-kilometer radius. In the past week, we bumped off 14,000 in Minsk. I've got lots to tell you when we next see each other."
Einsatzgruppe C marched on. In July, Seidel and his comrades entered Kiev alongside the regular German army. At first, the city's Jewish residents reacted calmly. Reuven Stein was 14 at the time.
My mother simply did not want to believe it. She had had experience of the Germans in the Ukraine from 1918. Then they hadn't done any harm to the civilians. She said that the Germans were civilized people and that they certainly would not allow anything to happen to civilians.
On the 29th of September 1941, Einsatzgruppe C rounded up all the Jews from Kiev. Their fate was now obvious.
I remember my mother said to me, "Try to save yourself. Muzhis and I won't make it." Her eyes were so full of fear and her lips were trembling. But somehow she managed to remain calm, and I would say she was almost cold. I will never forget her face at that moment.
This photograph was taken as the Jews were herded to their death.
I saw the secret police walk by the delinquents and collect their valuables. They shouted out for gold, silver, watches, and jewelry, and then they collected it all up in cigar boxes or on plates.
The SS forced the Jews towards Babi Yar ravine.
There was a flat ledge over the ravine. The people were lined up, naked. Their clothes had been taken away. And then they were herded down the slope. At the bottom, the marksmen stood waiting for them. And if someone didn't immediately fall down, then they were given a shove with a rifle butt. I was made to watch as they led along an old man and an old woman in a cart. The woman lay under a cover and was wringing her hands. She was obviously very ill. Her husband sat next to her. They took both of them directly to the ravine, swung them around, and then, laughing, threw them into the ravine.
Within 2 days, the SS murdered a total of 33,771 Jews. Some SS men calmly took photographs of the slaughter. Among them was Harry Seidel.
I then went back again, went up to the ravine and took 2 or 3 photos of how it looked down there. And then I had to leave again, because it wasn't our concern. We didn't really worry about it.
Though Seidel denies he shot anyone himself, he does admit that he might well have done if he'd been ordered to.
Whether I would have shot, I really can't tell you. Probably.
This is Sonderkommando 4A, the unit which carried out the Babi Yar massacre. They are shoemakers, bakers, craftsmen and academics. Ordinary men.
We regarded it all as necessary. They were Jews, they were Bolsheviks. There was only one answer: to shoot them.
Babi Yar was one of the most notorious crimes of World War II.
We couldn't have changed anything anyway. Or what do you think? What could we have changed?
Death's Head units played a major role in the Jewish ghettos that became clearinghouses for death camps like Auschwitz. In spring 1943 in Warsaw, the order came to empty the Jewish ghetto. The Jews rebelled. Thousands preferred to go down fighting rather than be transported to the death camps. Despite overwhelming odds, they put up a brave fight against the SS.
As the rebellion began, none of us believed that we would survive. We had a completely different goal. It was the last opportunity for revenge against the SS soldiers for all the years of murder.
These photographs document the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising. They come from the personal collection of a Death's Head officer, Brigadier Jürgen Stroop.
Stroop wrote about this battle in the ghetto as if it were a completely normal military operation. They were more than simply murderers, because they came and seized people who had been in hiding, who were starving, people who had already reached the last days of their lives.
Stroop clearly believed that pictures like these could only be to his credit in Nazi Germany.
He always wanted to get higher. He bragged about every Jew who was transported away or killed. He spoke about how brave his troops were and how perfectly he carried out his campaigns. That was his way of making a career for himself.
That career began in the Westphalian town of Detmold. Stroop worked in the land registry as a lowly bureaucrat. In 1933, he seized the chance to join the SS. To many Nazis, the local memorial to the ancient tribal leader Hermann the Warrior King symbolized the new era of German nationalism. Once Stroop joined their ranks, he rose from obscure civil servant to SS general with astonishing speed. After the war, he maintained he'd always just obeyed orders.
He said that he had faithfully followed the orders of his superiors, and the most superior was Adolf Hitler. Hitler had demanded all that from him, and he had only followed orders.
The Einsatzgruppen were staffed by men from all over the Nazi Empire. As well as Death's Head soldiers, they included SS men from the security police and the Gestapo. Others came from police reserve battalions. all followed SS orders. Those who found the slaughter difficult saw themselves as suffering for a higher cause.
Dann habe ich ihn gefragt.
Then I asked him how they coped with this, with what they were doing to the Jews.
Was sie hier mit den Juden tun. Und dann sagt
And he said, yes, we've got the hardest job, but we are the Führer's most loyal servants. For the Führer, we are prepared to commit atrocities.
eben auch das Schreckliche.
Most obeyed the order to kill in cold blood. A few tried to find an escape clause from murder.
There were many sick notes. Every day there were more than 30, sometimes even 50 or 60 people who wanted to sign off sick. But as a rule, only some of them were signed off. They were then given some kind of pill or other.
But all the killing took a heavy mental toll on the killers.
There were also some murderers who ended up taking their own lives. They killed themselves. If they had their own kids at home and then they killed some kids, they were never quite the same again. And so the Nazis looked for a more impersonal way of murdering. That's why they came up with gas.
The gas chambers made murder much more indirect and much easier for the Death's Head murderers. At this training school near Berlin, SS men learnt how to administer poisonous gas to rats. Hans Stark was a pupil here. This is the roof of the gas chamber at Auschwitz. In 1942, the year of his exams, Hans Stark regularly used to fill it with Zyklon B, the lethal poison gas.
Stark never showed any compassion. Quite the contrary. He mimicked those who begged for mercy. He acted as if it were all a prank. How could an educated human being be so brutal?
Another prisoner remembers the sadism of Hans Stark.
Und sie sagt, Herr Kommandant, ich bitte Sie, lassen Sie mich leben. Ich habe doch nicht gemacht. Los, Sarah, stehen. Sarah, stehen, Sarah, stehen. Los, musst du stehen? Er spricht ja so. Ja? Und dann schießt er sie alle.
At Auschwitz, the Death's Head soldiers carried out their orders so that the death factory functioned exactly as planned.
The train hadn't quite stopped as the doors to the carriages were yanked open. And then came the yelling and the shouting, out, 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 leave your luggage in the carriage. And then we jumped out. They ordered the men to go to the right, women with children to the left, women without children further out to the left.
From 1943, the man in charge of the main camp at Auschwitz was Arthur Liebehenschel.
I knew that he was at Auschwitz, but that didn't mean anything to me. I just thought that was where he worked.
Before Auschwitz, Liebehenschel had worked in Oranienburg, close to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. He enjoyed a happy family life there, a stone's throw from the camp.
My father was a very caring father. Every morning I got up with him. I can still see his hand as he spread honey on my bread. And now and again I was allowed to accompany him. His chauffeur picked him up, and I was allowed to go in the back in my nightdress to the tea building where he worked.
As Eicker's chief of staff for the inspection of concentration camps, Liebehenschel directed genocide from his office at Oranienburg. In November 1943, Lieber Henschel was transferred to Auschwitz. He said goodbye to his children.
I will never forget you, and when your innocent hands fold into prayer, then pray to God that I shall stay healthy. Forever yours, Papa.
The new commandant surprised inmates with the mildness of his manner.
Lieber Henschel was a typical official. He was forever going round and inspecting things. I never saw him actually hit a prisoner. He was a gentle man. And I must say, he was also somehow a perfectly normal man.
But the horrific truth of Auschwitz haunted him.
He didn't feel good there at all. He suffered terribly. I know that from his second wife. She told us about it. When new trainloads arrived, he always had to go over there. He would say, "My God, all the women and children." And when he got home, he would stand for ages under the shower, as if he had to wash away all the dirt. And she often said, "Let's go for a bit of a walk out in the fresh air."
Like many SS men, Lieber Henschel's actions in the death camps were a far cry from his life outside.
These were ordinary people with ordinary lives outside. They weren't born sadists, although there were some sadists at the camps, but not many at Auschwitz. And I can't understand how these normal people could participate in mass murder day in, day out.
But whatever he felt, the Death's Head Commandant Lieber Henschel obeyed orders.
He was never violent and was more gentle than the others. And yet he was a criminal like the others, because he too took part in the selection on the ramp.
He was in on it from the beginning, so he always knew what was going on. Even though he was working in an office, he was working on these things, so he must have known what was going on. And certainly when he got to Auschwitz, then he saw it for real, the suffering that went on there.
Lieber Henschel was one of the most senior officials in the Death's Head killing machine. Once the full horror of the camps was revealed after the war, the Allies made it their business to track him down. When the concentration camps were liberated, the world learnt that the Death's Head units had gassed over 1 million Jews at Auschwitz alone. The Allied soldiers who opened up the camps were not prepared for what they found. Many still can't get over what they saw.
I had been a liberator of many concentration camps as a soldier in the American armies. I had seen the product of mass murder in Buchenwald, in Ebensee, in Mauthausen. I certainly was shocked by that experience. I was traumatized by that experience, which has not left me to this day.
Determined to prosecute those responsible, in 1945 Benjamin Ferencz made it a priority to hunt down those who'd given the orders for mass murder.
The most important characteristic that I looked for was men of education and intelligence. I didn't want to have as a defendant some poor soldier that was ordered to go out and commit some criminal act and didn't realize what he was doing.
Many pleaded they'd done nothing wrong.
My reasoning was that if they were educated men, they would have been aware of the criminality and the magnitude of the crimes they were committing.
In Nuremberg in 1947, there was a special trial of Einsatzgruppen leaders. Their troops, including many from the Deaths Head units, killed between 1 and 2 million people in cold blood behind the lines.
Guilty or not guilty? Nicht schuldig. Guilty or not guilty? Nicht schuldig. Guilty or not guilty? Nicht schuldig.
They certainly were murderers, but not the traditional type of murderer. They were not sadistic, habitual criminals. That they were not. Murderers they surely were. Murderers in spades, mass murderers on a scale never before seen in human history.
Otto Ohlendorf was one of the Einsatzgruppen leaders. The Nuremberg judges were amazed to find that this cultured officer spoke with total indifference about the crimes of the century.
Ich kann nur wiederholen, was ich nunmehr seit 2,5 Jahren sage, dass nach meiner besten Erinnerung von den Einsatzkommandos 90.000 gemeldet waren. Es sind 90.000 gemeldet worden.
The biggest disappointment for me was the complete absence of remorse. I would have felt quite different about them if anyone had ever said he was sorry. They never said they were sorry, because they were not sorry. They were sorry they lost the war.
At Landsberg prison, west of Munich, the judges pronounced 14 death sentences on leaders of the Einsatzgruppen. 4 were carried out. But right to the last, none of the condemned ever expressed any remorse. One wrote,
"Discipline and loyalty brought me to the gallows. Even to this day, I do not know how I could have acted differently."
This was the tie which bound all of them. Opera singers, lawyers, economists, architects. Another thing they had in common, they were all prepared to commit mass murder for their ideals without any hesitation or any regret.
Years of indoctrination from school days on had helped prepare many SS men for genocide, and they were still convinced of this reasoning even after the war.
There is the master race, and then there are brutes. There are races of mankind which are distinguishable not for historical reasons, but rather, as they said at the time, by blood. That was accepted. This ideology poisoned people, corrupted them. You are a member of the master race, which was great because you could benefit from that. At least in a small circle, you can be a small Führer yourself.
At Dachau, the Americans were holding high-ranking SS officers in custody. Among them was Arthur Lieberhenschel. Under questioning, Lieberhenschel protested his innocence.
Ich habe überall zwischengefunkt, wo überhaupt was gefunden war. Nachher ist alles glatt gelaufen. Ich war für jeden Menschen da. Das kann mir jeder Einzelne bestätigen, der anders durchblickt. Ich habe aus Auschwitz ein Sanatorium gemacht, hört sich lächerlich an, aber das, was die Häftlinge sagen.
But prisoners' accounts didn't bear out his claims. Extradited to Poland, he was tried and sentenced to death in Krakow in 1948.
In the end, I do think he resigned himself to it. He even wrote a farewell letter, and at the bottom it said, "Have just received my sentence. They have sentenced me to death. There you go."
In Frankfurt in 1964, after years of evasion, some rank-and-file Death's Head men from Auschwitz finally stood trial. They included Hans Stark.
Die Sitzung und Verhandlung des Schwurgerichts am Landgericht in Frankfurt am Main ist eröffnet.
Up till then, my brother hadn't said a word to his wife or family about him being in Auschwitz. And then, when he was arrested in Cologne, in reaction to his wife's questioning look, he said that it was because of something to do with the war.
Stark was accused of single-handedly murdering 44 inmates. To the last, he said he was innocent of all the charges against him. He denied everything.
Ich bestreite die vorgebrachten Belastungen. Im Block 11 war ich ebenfalls nicht bei Massenerschießungen weder anwesend, noch habe ich dabei mitgeschossen. Auch habe ich niemals eine Frau geschlagen.
Ich kann vor allen Dingen nicht billigen.
Above all, I cannot approve of the fact that he did not want to face what actually happened there,
Geschehen ist, was
what he brought about.
mit verursacht hat.
Hans Stark was found guilty. But because he'd been a minor at the time of the murders, he was sentenced under the law for juvenile offenders to only 10 years in jail. He always insisted he'd only followed orders.
Führerbefehl, wir folgen dir, kann nach Auschwitz führen. The mentality, if the Führer commands it, we follow, can lead to another Auschwitz. Blind subordination to a leader is unacceptable and should not be seen as an inevitable part of human nature. People must take responsibility for what they do, even in critical situations. And that is something that still applies today.
Auch für heute gilt. The unquestioning loyalty of Death's Head men like Hans Stark is a somber reminder of the terrifying power of the SS.